Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Doug Smith, and this is the second video in the series that we are calling the Opioid Monologues. In these videos, we will see and understand how the incorrect and inaccurate diagnosis of opioid addiction led to the implementation of a useless and worthless treatment plan of counseling that allowed thousands and thousands of people to die a premature, unnecessary, and preventable death. This diagnosis of opioid addiction required the fundamentals of both science and medicine to be ignored, and the evidence is overwhelming. As we said in the introductory video, in order to believe in a diagnosis of opioid addiction, one must suspend belief in science and medicine and begin to believe in the impossible. Now, to get started, we're going to lay out some of the evidence and some of the best known experts in the world that the treatment plan most people received for their opioid dependency was lacking any scientific evidence to support this treatment plan. These are fancy words to say the treatment was worthless. Now, let's jump right into what I consider to be the single most important quote of this entire opioid crisis. This quote comes from page 43 of the article by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, entitled "The Prescription Opioid Epidemic, an Evidence-Based Approach." Excellent article, by the way. Now, here is the quote. "Psychosocial interventions, like medication treatment, may occur in the inpatient or the outpatient setting. While some studies support improved effectiveness of combining psychosocial therapies with buprenorphine and methadone maintenance, abstinence-based psychosocial approaches that shun medication-assisted treatment are lacking evidence to support the practice." Now, let's look closer at the second half of that quote. Abstinence-based psychosocial approaches that shun medication-assisted treatment are lacking evidence to support the practice. Lacking evidence to support the practice. Okay, this is a vitally important quote. In fact, I do not want the viewer to go any further into these videos until you are sure of this quote. And let me explain. Psychosocial intervention is a fancy word for counseling. Medication-assisted treatment is a fancy word for buprenorphine. We don't use or recommend methadone. More on that later. So, please allow me the luxury of rereading this sentence, but with the noted changes. And here we go. Abstinence-based counseling approaches that shun buprenorphine are lacking evidence to support the practice. Abstinence-based counseling approaches that shun buprenorphine are lacking evidence to support the practice. Now, let me add my own twist here, okay? The good people at Johns Hopkins are going out of their way to remain courteous and professional. The term "are lacking evidence to support the practice" is an example of them trying to remain courteous and professional. So let me add my own interpretation here, okay? To me, the words "lacking evidence to support the practice" means the effort was worthless. So in my view, this is how I interpret the Johns Hopkins quote. The viewer is free to their own interpretation, but here is how I read it. Counseling programs that don't use buprenorphine are worthless. That's my interpretation. The viewer is free to agree or disagree with me. Counseling programs that don't use buprenorphine are worthless. Counseling programs that don't use buprenorphine are worthless. Now, why does any of this matter? Why does it matter? How can this be related to an understanding of why this opioid crisis has gone on for so long and claimed so many? Well, now the answer is simple to understand. The treatment that the overwhelming majority of people received is worthless. It's worthless treatment. And guess what happens in an epidemic when the treatment is worthless? Simple. The epidemic continues and a lot of people die a needless and preventable death. This is not rocket science. If you employ a worthless solution against a deadly epidemic, a lot of people are going to die. So why are we doing it? It's hard to estimate, and I could really use some help here on pulling together these numbers. But it looks to me like we are spending about 70 cents out of every dollar on worthless counseling-based programs. Many people have been to multiple worthless programs. If we had put those people on buprenorphine years ago, as the science suggested, the opioid crisis would be long over, and a lot of really good people would still be alive. So, this begs the next question. Why? Why? Why would we use a worthless treatment and against the scientific evidence and against a deadly epidemic? In my experience as a physician, when I have seen treatment to be ineffective, I'm immediately going to doubt the diagnosis. See, in medicine, it's the diagnosis, okay, that leads to the treatment plan. And if you pick the right diagnosis, then you will pick the correct treatment plan and you will get a good outcome. But if you pick the wrong diagnosis, okay, then you'll pick an incorrect treatment plan and you're going to get a bad outcome. You're not going to get what you need. And that is exactly and precisely what is happening in this opioid crisis. Opioid addiction is an incorrect diagnosis. Now let me say that again. Opioid addiction is an incorrect diagnosis. And just to be clear before we move on, opioid addiction is an incorrect diagnosis, and therefore counseling is an incorrect treatment. I don't have anything against counseling. Counseling helps plenty of people and in a variety of situations. But counseling is not effective for our people dependent upon the opioids. Why? Simple. Because opioid addiction is the wrong diagnosis. Why has this opioid crisis gone on for so long? Because we have misdiagnosed the patient and have given them ineffective treatment in the vast majority of cases. And this is what the people in the future will know. And this is why they will be looking at us in the same manner in which we look at the people involved in the Salem witch trials. Read again the quote from Johns Hopkins. The truth is within those words. But now the question, why? Why? Why would we employ a useless treatment and against a deadly epidemic? I'm going to turn now to another quote. And again, from another expert. This quote comes from Dr. Andrew Saxon, and from an interview he did with a really sharp writer named Ann Fletcher. Okay, the article is titled, where is my article? There we are. The article is titled, Opioid Addiction. Why don't more rehabs use Suboxone? Here's one quote I like from Dr. Saxon. It's not the one we're going to use, not the one we're going to discuss, but I still like it. And I quote, Dr. Saxon, I get so frustrated with these inpatient programs that are wasting people's time and money and exposing them to the risk of overdose. That is an excellent quote. It's not the one we're going to use, but still a real good quote. The quote that we are going to go with is this one. When asked why more facilities do not use Suboxone, buprenorphine, Dr. Saxon replied, now listen to this, and I quote, of course it is only speculation, but one obvious answer is that the residential and inpatient programs have a financial incentive to detox people and tell them that recovery without medication-assisted treatment is better. If a patient is choosing to go on methadone or Suboxone, inpatient treatment is unnecessary in the vast majority of cases. Wow. Did you hear that? And Dr. Andrew Saxon is a prominent and well-respected expert out of the University of Washington. And did you hear what he just said? The residential and inpatient programs have a financial incentive to detox people and tell them that recovery without buprenorphine is better. A financial incentive to lie is what that says to me. and they have been getting away with it and making a lot of money. But see, they withheld information from the patient. They did not uphold informed consent, and that's a problem. This withholding of information could create a legal liability, especially if the patient dies of an opioid overdose after undergoing a treatment that was worthless, knowingly worthless. This science has been out there for years. These people have known this counseling stuff was worthless, and there is no bigger payer than the state and federal government. It's our tax dollars that have been used to empower these so-called experts, and our tax dollars that is paying for all this snake oil. So there you have it in a nutshell. Why has this opioid crisis gone on for so long and claimed so many? Simple. We used predominantly worthless and ineffective treatments that appear to be driven by a financial incentive. How did that happen? Let's look at that in the upcoming videos, where we will document and in exact detail how the current predominant group of experts called ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, how this group was deceitful. They were deceitful in their use of science and ignored the foundations of the practice of medicine. And I wonder what Dr. Andrew Saxon would say about that. Thank you. My name is Dr. Doug Smith, and these are the Opioid Monologues.